Let's call this our election midway point. Here's what I mean. We just finished another one. We've made it about a year since a previous one, and we still have about a year to go before the next one. So, what did election 2021 show us, and what are the issues that parents, students, teachers, and elected officials will now deal with? Plus, we will talk with one of those decision makers. She's no longer just researching how policies impact us. She'll now be a decision maker making those policies, even though she really did not expect to be in this position. And we'll look at how some prominent Iowa Republicans react to what this former president keeps saying about his 2020 defeat and how this lingers as we move toward the 2022 election.
From your local election headquarters, this is The Insiders with Dave Price.
Never before have so many Iowans felt compelled enough to vote as they did during this past week's elections. About 425,000 Iowans voted in these local elections. That was nearly 67,000 people more than 2 years ago. Meanwhile, the former president continues his nearly daily series of accusations about what he thinks happened in 2020.
Because their ratings have gone down the tubes. But they called it the big lie. But the big lie turned out to be the corrupt election itself. But you ever notice where you always read in there, while there is no evidence to prove this, there's so much evidence, it's pouring out of our ears. We've never had so much evidence.
So if you recall, that is what he was telling people last month when he rallied before several thousand supporters at the Iowa State Fairgrounds in Des Moines. By the way, we've never really found an accurate way to estimate the crowd size, but we do know, looking at it, it's one of the largest in recent memory in our state. Now, dozens of times in various ways, he was alleging that fraud cost him the 2020 election. Now, he has failed to convince Congress, the courts, law enforcement, or his former vice president that he really did win. Now, some of Iowa's most prominent Iowa Republicans had joined him that day on stage, and here was some of the things that they were saying about him.
Oh my gosh, Iowa, this is great. This gives me so much hope for our country to look out in this audience and see so many freedom-loving, liberty-defending patriots. They're going to stand on the line for the great United States of America.
The Republican Party's back, and Donald Trump is back right here in the Hawkeye State.
President Trump and I were proud to deliver for the hardworking people of Iowa and the United States.
Now, none of those three said that Trump really won the election, so we have to point that out. But over the past couple of weeks, I did get a chance to talk to two Iowa congresswomen who were also on stage individually with Trump on that day. Now, by standing with him a year after the 2020 election, when he's saying these things about what he thinks happened, are they too showing that they believe Trump actually won instead of Joe Biden? Here's what Ashley Hinson said.
Well, I've said before, again, Joe Biden is the president right now, and the Constitution was clear. I voted to certify the results of that election, and I do believe that it is critical that people have faith in our election system, and I'm continuing to work on promoting confidence in our free and fair elections. We know Iowa got it right, and my biggest focus going forward is ensuring that states can run their own elections and not the federal government. I think that's absolutely crucial going forward. That's what I'm talking with Iowans about on this and other issues.
Now, here is how Congresswoman Mariannette Miller Meeks responded to the same question. She did it differently.
The president said a lot of things in addition to that. He talked about border security, and he talked about the wall. He talked about the number of people coming into our country illegally who have not been tested for COVID-19. And as you know, I have a bill requiring testing for COVID-19 at the southern border, actually at all borders. And the people coming from Afghanistan are COVID-19 tested, interestingly enough, that there's a difference there. He also talked about inflation. He talked about supply chain, the economy, economic growth. So he talked about a lot of things. But one thing I can say is because of the election law changes we have made in Iowa in the past 3 years, people in Iowa can trust that our elections are fair, that they can have confidence and trust in our process, and that both parties, when they talk about either on one party talking about voter suppression if you ask for voter ID, the other party saying, and I think over the weekend I heard Stacey Abrams and Terry McAuliffe running for governor in Virginia talk about the election was stolen from Stacey Abrams in Georgia when she ran for governor. That on both sides, that undermines confidence in our election system. And we need to have trust in both our election system and in institutions of government that are there to help people. In Iowa, I know that we can have trust and confidence in our election system because of the changes we've made over the past 3 years. Other states are also putting in some election integrity measures and security measures. And those laws have been opposed and denigrated. And I don't think that's helpful for all of us. To me, how do you answer election fraud? If you think there's fraud, the way to answer it, get out to vote in huge numbers. So people need to turn out to vote. They need to turn out to vote in overwhelming support for the candidate that they choose to support.
But did fraud cost him the election or not?
I'd say that there were irregularities and that there were states that violated their own legislative codes. And that's something that I think can be looked at and should be looked at. And I think states should be very proactive in looking at how they can improve their election system. For instance, if you look at Florida, so if you remember Gore v. Bush, so there was an election process. Everybody remembers if they're old enough, they remember the hanging chad in Florida and how fraught that election was and how challenging and difficult. And now Florida has an election system where who won the presidential election the night of the election. So I think that's something that we can learn from Florida, and all of us have an interest in ensuring that there's election integrity.
Two different answers from these two Iowa Congresswomen. Now, two other Republicans, Senator Joni Ernst and Congressman Randy Feenstra, you'll recall, did not attend the rally that day. Now, neither did Iowa Secretary of State Paul Pate, another Republican. He has been working to try to restore faith among the doubters out there. His opinion is that while mistakes can happen in any election, there was not widespread fraud that changed the outcome of the presidential race last time around, but it is difficult, he says, to break through with that message to those who do not believe that.
It is challenging when anybody in a higher position, who's got a bully pulpit, if you will, to be able to say things like that and perhaps don't distinguish very clearly on what they mean by it or where is this challenge coming from. The best I can do is I work with my peers in the elections game here in Iowa to give them the facts, again, showing them everything we do so they know that, our system here, again, paper ballot, can't hack it. We have cybersecurity measures in place on a whole list of checks and balances. The voter ID to make sure only it's really Paul Pate who's here voting. All those steps and measures collectively to demonstrate we're doing it right. And that's how we got to do, because we can't afford not to have confidence in the results. We can do everything we want about getting everybody access to voting, but if people are going to be convinced that that isn't my governor or that isn't my senator or my president, then our democracy is in serious challenge. I think people have a right to ask questions to make sure things are being handled properly, because we are human and there can be human errors. And there are some dumb people out there who try things they shouldn't try. But that's why we have to balance integrity with the participation side. And I think we've done a pretty good job in Iowa of doing just that. You can't have record voter turnout if you're stopping people from actually having access to the voting, but we also want to make sure they should be voting. And I think we've done a good job here on that front.
Up next, the professor who has researched elections and the candidates who get elected now becomes one of them.